It's Friday. It's the best day of the week for a lot of reasons. It's the best day of the week for being the end of the week, right? Finally, the weekend is here, but it's also the best day of the week because it is the Morning Pitt Mailbag. This is when you guys decide the topics. You ask all the questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, the Between Fifth and Forbes premium message board there. We take open up for questions starting on usually Tuesday. Sometimes I forget and don't post it until Wednesday, but you guys come through with a lot of great questions. We answer them all right here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt Mailbag, or the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, which is the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So we got questions about recruiting. We got questions about, remaining spots in the recruiting class. I looked over the questions. I've already forgotten what some of them are, which is good. It'll be a little bit more fresh, although we'll have some research and, a little bit of preparation done for these questions. So let's not waste any more time on the preamble. Let's jump into it. The Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, Friday's always the best day. I always look forward to doing these. I mean, I say it every week, but Monday through Thursday, we're coming up with topics. We're coming up with things to talk about. We're scheduling interviews like we had with Mike Stacchiotti for the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt. That was a lot of fun. I hope you got to check that out. If there's any, I want you to watch every episode of the Morning Pitt, but you should definitely watch the ones where we have the guests, where we have Pitt's strength and conditioning coach, Mike Stacchiotti, and we talked about how he adapted Pitt's training program to fit Cade Bell's tempo offense. It's something I've been curious about for a while, and it was great to finally ask him those questions. Obviously our Jeff Capel interview a month or two ago, whenever that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. And all of it. I mean, like I say, I want you to watch every episode that we do, but if you're only going to watch some, watch the interview ones, because I think they tend to be pretty interesting. We've had some really good interviews, really good conversations, and Mike Stacchiotti this week was no exception. So check that out. But throughout the week, I mean, you got to plan these things out. You plan out what we're going to talk about Monday. What are we going to talk about on Tuesday? I have some idea of some things that we could talk about next week. We know there'll be recruiting topics. But when it comes to the Friday episode of the Morning Pitt, I know I can count on you guys to come up with good questions to get us through this episode. And it's a nice way to go about a Friday. We hit a bunch of different topics. We get into a bunch of different conversations. And I don't want to say it's less work for me, because I still want to find, read through the questions and see if I need to do some prep or, a little bit of research to be able to answer the questions well. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But it is a little bit easier because you guys are coming up with those topics. And so I appreciate everybody who contributes the questions to the mailbag, and I appreciate, of course, everybody who watches. And look, while you're here, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The subscribe button's right down there, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we have all of our Pitt video content all day, every day. Not all day, every day. That's what I say about the message board. See, I'm mixing up the taglines. But every day of the week, we have exclusive Pitt video content. The Morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. The weekly live show on Wednesday night. Those are always fun to do. And anything else that might come up. Interviews, press conferences, breaking news, all that stuff. It's right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then, of course, the website Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com will have lots of coverage of the official visits that are happening right now. The recruits are all on campus. They're having the time of their lives. The times of their lives. And we're going to have all the coverage of it, probably some today and a lot tomorrow as the recruits head home. We see if guys commit and what ends up happening. So let's jump into the questions for the mailbag. Recruiting questions, of course. Start us off. Gull Point asking, are we finally done recruiting receivers? If not, does that mean they're not impressed with our current young receivers? So the receivers, it's an interesting question, and it's an interesting topic, and we talked a little bit about it on Wednesday night during the live stream. Pitt has 3 commitments from receivers already. They had Bryce Yates already locked up. They got Ja'Karian Turner and Demarion Folks over the weekend. Tony Kinsler, who's potentially a receiver, potentially a running back. Folks is a little bit like that. Turner's a little bit more like that. You look at the touchdowns he scored. A lot of them were, rushing and sweeps and things like that, direct snaps and that kind of thing. So, there's some position flexibility with a few of these guys. But yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, when you look at 3 commitments already, you say, well, I mean, how many more do they need? Well, they've got more receivers coming in. They've got more receivers coming on visits. Not necessarily this weekend. I don't think there's any receivers visiting this weekend, but next weekend they've got a couple guys lined up. Emmanuel Taylor, Gianni Contosis. I think there was 1 or 2 others who could potentially be a receiver. So, if those visits get canceled, then we'll say, okay, it looks like they're set. They want to take 3 receivers. And be done with it. But if they still bring those guys in, then we would probably assume that they're looking to potentially take 4 receivers. Is that a lot? Is that too many? Does it reflect on what they think of the current group of young receivers? Probably no to all of those questions. I mean, it would be a lot. Yeah. Is it too many? Probably not. You look at the last few recruiting classes. I mean, they did, 2 years ago, the class with Kenny Johnson and Izzy Polk and, Zion Fowler-El and Lamar Seymour, they took 4 that year, right? But the year before that, I think they took 2, Chewabuko and Addison Copeland, and Copeland's already gone. The year before that, I mean, what recruiting class would that have even been? 2020, let me look it up here, 20 or 21? Because I think Wabuko and Copeland were in the 22 class. So the 2021 recruiting class, they took Jaden Bradley and Miles Alston as wide receivers. And both of those guys are already gone. So, you're already missing that group. And then the 2019 class, or the 2020 class, was Jordan Addison and Jalen Barden, I think. And those guys are gone. So, from the 20 and 21 classes, and again, that's a while ago. The 2020 class, if those guys had stuck around, they'd be redshirt seniors. They'd be fifth-year players this year. The 21 class would be redshirt juniors or true seniors this year. They'd be fourth-year players. But they're all emptied out. And then the 22 class only had 2 guys. One of them's already gone, and the other one doesn't really play. So, yeah, it makes sense that the 2023 class had to be big with 4 recruits. And then this past year, Cam Montero and Tyreek Robinson, they only took 2 true freshmen this year. It's a big part of the reason that when you look at the receiving core, you're looking at, I think, 11 scholarship players as it's currently stands. And Kanate Mumfield, Raphael Williams, Sincere Lee, Dejon Reynolds, they're all transfers. That's more than a third of the receiving core they've had to backfill because that 2020 and 21 classes washed out or just aren't still around for a variety of reasons, and there's only 1 guy left from the 22 class. So 3 recruiting classes have produced 1 player on the current roster. They've had to backfill with transfers, but I don't think it's crazy to think they need to take another big class just to build up the foundation. Because also, we talk about that 2023 recruiting class. They took 4 guys, Johnson, Fowler-El, Polk, and Seymour. Polk is already gone from that group and went into the transfer portal. So I don't think, if they take another receiver and they go for 4 receiver recruits in this class, or even 5 with some position flexibility in a few of those guys, I don't know if it necessarily means they're lacking confidence in the guys on the roster as much as it just might mean they need to rebuild the roster. And they're doing a lot of that through the transfer portal, but they're going to have to do it with the high school ranks as well. So that's kind of what I would take from that. RNC21 says, you may not want to reveal the recruit's name, but in all your years recovering recruiting at Pitt, what is the craziest or weirdest recruitment story you've seen? Questions like this are tough. And we get questions like this probably 1 out of every 3 or 4 mailbags. What's the wildest recruitment story? What's the weirdest recruit or the strangest interview or things like that? And I don't know. It's a tough question to answer. If you cover recruiting for 20 years, you're going to probably see it all. Now, adding in NIL, some of the other changes in recruiting over the past few years has changed my thought of what seeing it all was, what that actually means. But you sort of feel like you've seen it all. I mean, I've seen Juan Price flipping a coin on signing day. I was there for Robert Foster. I was at Drayvon Henry's announcement when his mom put the Pitt coaches on blast. It was just something I had never seen before. I drove to Clairton and watched Desmond Green announce that he was going to go to Lubbock, Texas. And those are just the weird commitment story, weird recruitment story. I mean, I watched Pitt semi-slow play MJ Devonshire coming out of high school. I was there for Russell Shell's commitment and that whole odyssey. I was there, up to last year with Coy Beasley being totally committed. He was definitely going to commit to Pitt, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. I was there for Miles Diefenbach talking about Pitt and saying we and using first person pronouns only to commit to Penn State after one visit there. And those are just the things that relate to Pitt. I mean, there's weird recruiting stories all over the place. It's hard to really say, oh, there was this one that was the weirdest thing or the strangest thing. There's weird stuff all the time, and I think it all just sort of blends together, and you come to understand, what you come to realize, I think, is that it's recruiting. It's a whole industry for the coaches and for people in my position that's built and sort of hangs on the whims and the swings of 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. Of course it's going to get weird. Like, how could it not get weird? You're following every move of a teenager and, hanging on every word of a teenager. And I think it's got to be even more stressful and more perplexing for coaches whose livelihood actually depends on what those teenagers decide. My job ultimately doesn't depend on what those teenagers decide. They pick Pitt, they pick Robert Morris, they pick Pepperdine. It doesn't matter for my job. My job is just to report on it. My job is to cover it. Coaches are actually getting, could get fired if they miss on too many of the priority recruits. And so I can't imagine what it's like for those guys. I can't imagine what kind of swings you go through there. But you just understand that this is the landscape. And this was the landscape in 2004, and it's the landscape in 2024. And the circumstances change. Look, the kids haven't changed. They're still kids. But the rest of us have changed. The rest of us have grown up and grown old, and the circumstances of it have changed. Twitter has changed it. Huddle has changed it, where you don't mail the DVDs and videotapes anymore to college coaches. I don't have to drive around to the local high schools in the Whitfield and pick up DVDs or videotapes of recruits anymore. A coach at Oregon State is interested in a kid in New Jersey. Well, okay, follow him on Twitter, send a DM, check out his Huddle link. Boom, you're recruiting him. It used to take weeks to get that far. Now it can happen in a matter of seconds. And so that has changed, but the kids are still just kids. And when you're dealing with kids, you're going to get into some weird stuff. You're going to get into weird decisions, weird twists of fate, weird mood swings. And it's only gotten sort of more extreme because we're more exposed to it through social media. And we're more exposed to the whims of the teenagers. So what's the weirdest one you can remember? I don't know. There's weird ones every year, to be honest. And there are going to be weird ones this year. Last year, the last 2 years really, with this sort of phenomena of kids committing and then waiting days and weeks and months before they announce it. To the point where kids commit, wait days and weeks and months, and then end up decommitting before they even announce that they publicly committed. Is that the weirdest story? I don't know. There were lots of weird things in 2008. So it's the nature of the beast, I guess is what I would say. It's the nature of the beast. There was a similar sort of question from Potter County native down here, and I want to bring this up as another sort of what's your favorite memory type of question. Says, being that the interview with Mike Stacchiotti was great, 2 questions on that subject arise. What's your favorite interview you have done with a coach, and what's your favorite interview you have done with a player/recruit? And so this is another one like that. 20 years of interviewing recruits, there are good ones every year, I think. And I don't think that's not me. That's just, you find kids who are good talkers, who have interesting stories. And then if you're able to get that story out of them, if you're able to get them to tell the story, then you're going to have a great interview. And I think there are those every year. And I think it's to some extent the same with the coaches. If you can find what makes that coach tick, what motivates that coach, what's that coach's conflict, and if you could tap into it, if you can ask the right questions, you can find the right angles, you can get great stuff. And so, you know what, actually, you want to know my favorite interviews with a coach and my favorite interview with a recruit? My favorite interview with a recruit might have been last December when we interviewed Jasir Winnington, and he talked about taking a service trip to Africa. That might have been my favorite interview. Because it was great, because we found that hook, we found that angle, and he was willing to talk about it, and he opened up about it. You know what was my favorite interview with the coach? Probably Jeff Capel, like last month or whenever that was. Now, maybe there's a little recency bias there, but man, he was great. You know, we found some topics he wanted to talk about. We approached them in a way that he wanted to talk about them, and he let loose. And I mean, we made 2 videos out of it because we talked for 40 minutes, and we could have talked for twice that amount of time. And I don't think it would have gotten boring. I don't think we would have gotten tired of the conversation. I think it would have been interesting all the way through. So maybe that's recency bias, or maybe it's just, you know, it's 20 years of doing this job. And there are great interviews every year, I'd like to think. You know, there are fun interviews, there are interesting interviews where I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, this is great listening to this right now. I'm learning things, and I'm really learning about an interesting person. And, you know, the Capel interview and Jasir Winnington. If you didn't watch the Jasir Winnington, go watch it. It's great. It's great stuff. And again, another guy where I probably could have talked to him for twice as long as I did, but I don't want to take up too much of these people's time. So that's what I would pick. It's tough. After a while, the years all sort of blend together, you know? I always wonder when you have some of these bands that play together for like 20, 30 years, like, what was your favorite concert? It's like, I don't know. Played hundreds of concerts every year, you know? Like, what was my favorite interview with the recruit? It's tough. I interview recruits hundreds of times a year. It's hard to really narrow it down. All right, let's get into some more questions here because there's a lot of great ones in this week's mailbag. El Salvador jumps right to the punch. You may have answered this in a previous mailbag, but what is your win-loss prediction for the 2024 season? And can the 2024 Pitt basketball team be a top half ACC team? To the second one, yes. I'm sold on this team. You know, like, and the Amsel Delalich, you know, put it over the top. I was sold on Jalen Lowe, Ishmael Leggett. I think the Damian Dunn addition is great. I think Brandon Cummings, with the role as the 4th guard, has a chance to flourish and pretty much earn everything he gets and not be forced into action like Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe were. And those guys did great in those roles, but Brandon Cummings isn't going to be forced into action. Any action he gets, any playing time he gets is going to be earned by his performance, which means he's going to be playing really well, right? Zach Austin, I think, could take some steps, but you mix Amsel Delalich, you put him in the mix there. I mean, I think it's just it's such a wild card that could put this thing over the top. I am bullish on Guillermo Diaz-Graham. I think Jim Hammond is even more bullish than I am, but I'm pretty bullish on Guillermo. We'll see what Jorge can do. Another injury, another setback for him. You feel bad there. Hopefully he's able to get right by the season and be able to play at a high level and contribute as a reserve wing. And then Cam Corrin. Jeff Capel sold me. You were talking about like that Jeff Capel interview. Jeff Capel sold me on Cam Corrin. I was already pretty high on the addition of Cam Corrin, but listening to Jeff Capel, listening to what they see in him and what they think he can do and why they think he can do it, I was like, okay, that works. You sold me. He's going to be good. And so you've got, I don't want to say, tell me what's missing. There's no missing pieces. There are, there are things that they're going to have to fill in. They're going to have to get the wing spot sort of settled. Although there's so much versatility in the players that you could go 3 guards. You could go 2 guards and Delalich, 2 guards and Austin, 2 guards and Delalich and Austin. You could go 2 guards and the Diaz-Graham twins. You could go 2 guards and Delalich and Diaz-Graham. I just think there's so many ways you can mix and match spots 3 and 4 mostly, 2 through 4 to some extent, and even 1 through 4 because I think you've got depth. I think you can have a couple different guys run the point behind Jalen Lowe, whether it's Ishmael Leggett, it's Damian Dunn, it's Brandon Cummings. Corrin, I think, is a big piece of this puzzle, and I think he's going to be really good, and I think he's going to be really important. And, yeah, I'm sold on them being a top half of the ACC team, for sure. I don't want to go so far as to say I don't have any doubt about it, but, if I were to invoke my inner Lanny Ferteri, I just might be inclined to say that. Prediction on the football team. A little less... not necessarily less bullish, although, yes, less certain. There's just too much uncertainty. That's the hard thing for me. I just don't know. I don't know how Cade Bell's offense is going to work. I don't know if Cade Bell's offense is going to work. I don't know how Nate Yarnell is going to play. I don't know how the depth of this offensive line is going to hold up if they have an injury or two. I don't know if these receivers are ready to be the consistent kind of players that this offense needs. I don't know if this defensive line is ready to be consistent like it needs to be. I have questions about the cornerbacks. Did they fix the punting situation? There are a lot of questions about this team. It's a winnable schedule. It's a schedule that should, set Pitt up for 8 wins. But I don't know. Like I don't know. So like my prediction, I think 8. So probably 7. Hopefully worst case scenario is 6. I don't know. And like, you can be uncertain about something and lean a little bit positive, lean a little bit negative. In my uncertainty, I probably lean a little bit negative. It's just sort of the reality of it, of how I sort of feel about it right now. But I'm more uncertain than anything. So I don't know. I don't have a record prediction yet. Maybe by the end of training camp, I'll have a prediction, but I don't have one. I don't have one right now. All right, there's still more good questions left, but we hit that 20-minute mark. This one I always like to try and cut it off. So we'll save some of those questions for next week, and we'll take more questions as always. If you asked a question we didn't get to this week, we will answer it next week, unless it somehow becomes irrelevant or something. But I don't think they will, looking over the questions. There are good questions in there. I'm looking forward to answering them for sure. So thanks, everybody who submitted questions this week. It was a lot of fun answering these questions, as always. Thanks, everybody who watched the video, liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and everybody who's on Panther-Lair.com. You're going to get all the Pitt recruiting info from this big official visit weekend, and we're excited about it for sure. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com is where all the coverage will be, and the message boards where you can interact with all of your closest Pitt fan friends to talk about all the recruits and everything that's going on. So thanks for watching this video. Thanks for watching all week. We appreciate it. And yeah, that wraps up this week on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like and subscribe. Have a great weekend. We'll catch up with you on Monday for all the recruiting recap right here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.